Hello and welcome to today's Take, Nine's brand new podcast hosted by me, Jane Azzopardi, where we take one story of the week just that little bit further. This week, it's not a fun topic or a nice one, but it is necessary. You didn't have to be a parent to feel sickened at the news this week that a childcare worker had been charged with the unthinkable. A 26-year-old childcare worker in Melbourne has been charged with more than 70 child sex offences. Live now to Nine Melbourne reporter Isabel Quinlan. Isabel, this man worked at 20 other centres right around Victoria.
He did, Jane, from 2017 up until May this year, and that's why police have grave fears and are bracing for more victims. But 26-year-old Joshua Brown has been charged with more than 70 offences, and they're in relation to one childcare centre in Point Cook, where he allegedly sexually abused 8 children between April 2022 and January 2023. Now, this is extremely distressing for families who may have come into contact with Brown, but to add to this distress, authorities are urging more than 1,200 children to be tested for sexually transmitted infections. Now, a major press conference was held yesterday with Victoria Police and the Victorian Government, and questions were raised over current practices and guidelines in childcare centres.
They will apply the necessary scrutiny to establish whether there was anything that could have been done differently.
Now, Brown has been remanded in custody and will face court again in September. Jane, a website has been established for families to get information as much as they can on this very, very distressing matter.
That was Nine Melbourne reporter Isabel Quinlan on Wednesday's Today Show. It is a really tough one to think about, and many parents are this week just wondering how to process the news themselves, how to talk to their children about it, and what signs to look out for. In a moment, we'll talk with psychologist Sandy Ray about exactly those things. But first, I do want you to listen to part of this interview that Carl and Sarah did with Georgie Dent from the Parenthood about how on earth something like this could happen and what further regulation is needed.
When these parents feel betrayed and they want answers and they deserve answers, does it come in the form of better regulations in the childcare sector?
Look, I think we have to acknowledge that this is a serious moment of reckoning. So we do know that the vast majority of early childhood educators are caring, skilled professionals who work so hard. And I know that for educators, this news is every bit as distressing and angering as it is for parents, because for those educators who genuinely care about the well-being and safety of children, this is just as sickening. It is absolutely clear that the early childhood education and care sector has grown at a pace which regulation has not kept up with. And so it is absolutely necessary for us to be having serious conversations about accountability, safety, transparency. We need to ensure that any early childhood education and care service that has its doors open is of a high quality, that the staff are appropriately trained and supported. We need to ensure that there are not cracks like this that any child can fall through.
Well, that was Georgie Dent from the Parenthood there, speaking a lot of sense. But regulations and penalties, of course, are a job for the government. As parents, whether you are personally affected by this horrendous case or not, there is just this huge sense of unease out there, and we all want to know how to process our thoughts about that. One person who is excellent at helping us do just that is psychologist Sandy Ray. Sandy, welcome to today's Take.
Thank you for having me.
Look, this is such a horrible topic to think about, let alone talk about. I think, and we should say from the outset that this case itself is before the court, so we're not going to go into the specifics of it. But when people heard about these allegations, there was just this universal feeling of like a physical sickness. Is that how you felt?
Absolutely. I think there wouldn't be a parent alive who wouldn't be really just so deeply traumatised, let alone any parent whose child has been allegedly abused. I guess the deep sense of betrayal, of shock, of guilt, of how did I not know, of questioning your own parenting, questioning the childcare authorities, questioning, what did I miss, what was going on, what checks had not been in place. I mean, I can only, it is a crisis for any of these families involved in this story.
We are going to get to the specifics of, what people who are unfortunately involved in this, how they should be processing it. But in general, I'm a parent, I've got kids in daycare every day, and we put so much trust in those workers. We spend a whole lot of money on the service, both as parents and as the government, and yet really we're all a bit helpless because we can't monitor our children the whole time they are there. How do you think we should all be navigating those sort of feelings of dropping our children off every day and being able to let go?
Look, I think one of the first things to be really clear about is that we have to be really real in catastrophic interpretations of what's going on here. Not unlike another, very significant trauma of the Bondi. Do we not go into, the Bondi stabbings? Do we not go into shopping centres? Do we not entrust our children when they're older to go in shopping centres? What's get in cars every day? Do we not get in cars in case there's a car accident? So I just want to make a point here of, whilst it is a crisis and is highly traumatic, we have to also be very measured in understanding that we need to be very mindful of culling in our emotions, especially with our children. I think the government has a huge responsibility, of course, in sort of doing, childcare welfare checks on people who are working with children. And I think this is really working with children permits are under scrutiny, because once you get a working with child permit, it's valid for 5 years. Well, what are the stops and checks and balances within that 5 years? What are the qualifications of the childcare educators? Generally they do a certificate course, but are they actually trained to look and identify children who are suffering from some type of trauma? And bear in mind that children come to childcare who also suffer from trauma in their family homes as well. So it's not just the idea that something can happen at childcare, but many children endure violence, mental illness from their parents, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and they get taken to childcare. So there's lots of different contexts that we have to understand. How do we trust these institutions? And by and large, these institutions are very trustworthy. This is, not necessarily, I don't know if it's the very first time, certainly it seems to be the first time on a large scale, but by and large, we have to have faith that these institutions, these childcare centres, are run with both good ethical conduct, good moral conduct, and good supervision of our children.
I think a lot of us did have faith, and this has really rocked that faith. I want to play you the reaction of one parent whose child attended one of the centres where this man worked.
You come in the morning, you drop your child, and he's just smiling at you, and then that smile is stuck on my mind now.
Sandy, you could really hear the sense of betrayal in her voice. And for those parents who now find that the childcare centre that their child attends is on that list, what is your advice to them? I'm going to go into a few stages of this, but firstly, how do they process their own feelings about that?
Well, the very first thing I think we need to be mindful of is that parents are the number one person at first call to look after. And I say that because parents need to be in a good place to be able to support their children. So first and foremost, we have to give full attention to the parents. And that means we have to have what's called a trauma-informed approach in looking after parents. That means being supportive. Every psychologist, probably every counsellor is trained in this. This is a normal pathway, or skill set, I should say. And that means validating their feelings, empowering their feelings, and normalising. So where you feel betrayed, whether you feel guilt, whether you feel shame, whether you feel a deep sense of anxiety and distrust, all of those feelings are completely and utterly normal. So there is no right way, there is no right response. And I think this is the formula. All I can say is, in a very general sense, is that every individual response is normal and we validate you.
And it might be hard for these parents to talk with other people about it. Would you advise that they do that?
Look, I'm in two minds about that at this point. I think, first of all, you really need to be really need to understand yourself. Am I able to talk about it, first of all? When I talk about it, am I re-traumatizing myself, first of all? But if you are at home and if you're a single parent, you may not have the support. So talking to friends and extended family members might absolutely be the right thing. And again, there is no right or wrong. I don't want to say, no, don't talk to people, or yes, talk to people. Really, what is it that you need to do in talking with people? Are you not getting validated? Are you not getting the support by talking to people? That you get that. Terrific. Go and talk to people. So again, it gets back to whatever works for you, whatever manner you seek out is the right one for you. And I guess it's also a sense of difficulty. How do I approach people? How do I talk to people that perhaps my child has been abused in the most abhorrent way that any parent could ever possibly imagine? How do I talk about sexual abuse that's, I get support from other people? Am I going to be isolated because my child has been involved in such a thing? So there's lots of queries about, what will I get from disclosing to other people?
Sandy, what about talking to their kids about it? Because I just get this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. If I was one of those parents who had received that phone call or that text message, and now we know there are 1,200 children right across Melbourne whose parents are having to get them tested for sexually transmitted diseases. I just, the trauma that involves, where do you even start addressing that with your child?
Look, I think that, as I've said, I'll try to allude to, parents have lost probably a lot of confidence, both as a parent and in a system. So then how do I know how to talk to child? I've lost confidence because I've placed my child in this childcare. How am I going to be competent in talking about this? So of course there's ages and stages. If we've got children under 2, what sort of conversation can we have with them? Then children under 5, we have different conversations between 2 and 5 years of age. So first of all, I think the first thing is get support for yourself. That was the very first thing. The overarching, I guess, theme in trying to look after parents and how to talk to children is don't push the children for answers. So don't go, what happened to you? Why did it happen? Why didn't you tell me? None of that. I can actually say categorically that is not the conversation to be had. One of the most important things when a trauma has happened at any age, right through to adulthood, is we need to make sure that people are in a very safe and secure environment. So for very young children, the most important thing is to have stability, security, routine dinner times, routine bedtimes, and not exposure to the news, obviously. So for the main overarching theme here is not so much talking for now, but regulating their behaviour and knowing that the children see you as their mirror to the world.
That is great advice. What about older siblings or older children who might attend these centres or have in the past? How do you kind of initiate a conversation with a child who now might be 7 or 8, or an older sibling who might be, in those tween ages?
Yeah. I think, we've talked a lot about, certainly there's a lot of education, as you know, Jane, about, consent talk, touching bodies, kissing bodies, when we say goodbye to, if the child doesn't want to kiss Nana or an auntie goodbye, they don't have to. So I think early on these conversations need to be had, and hopefully a lot of the families will have had these conversations already. Who is it safe to be with? What boundaries are acceptable? What strangers do we let into our lives? Et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully these conversations, these boundaries have already been established. And if not, it's never too late. So I don't want to laden parents with any more guilt if they haven't had these conversations. Again, one of the really compelling ways of talking to children is actually just sitting with a child, and we wait for these conversations to happen. And we can actually talk about you can give a role play, for instance, and say, I heard. What would you do if something like that happened with you? So role playing is a really great, gentle, non-intrusive way, because of course, if you start accusing a child of, why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I told? You know that I'm safe. Again, the message to the child is that you're to blame. The child is to blame. So parents, I think, really need to be, whilst you're suffocating in your own guilt and your own trauma, need to really try and hold on to the thought that what I have to do is in the best interest of the child. And we have to really pace ourselves and give our time, selves and the child, to gently come forward with that discussion.
I mean, this story has been everywhere across the TV news, across newspapers. I was sitting down with my family the other night. My children are 4 and 5, and the story came on the TV, and I just turned off the volume because I thought, I don't, you know, they go to a daycare. They have wonderful educators at their daycare, and I just felt that they were too young for that conversation. Is there an age where they are too young, or do we kind of keep the news aside and have other conversations with them at that age?
100% well done, Jane. I would always turn. You know, and I think we've probably had this conversation a number of times. You know, don't assume that just because a child asks questions at 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, that they have the emotional repertoire to deal with the answers, which might be confronting on TV. So you are the parent. In this case, there is a black and white response here, and that is we shut the TV down, we shut the news down on this instance, because they don't have the language, they don't have the emotional repertoire to deal with what does sexual abuse mean, mummy? What does rape mean, mummy? What does an offender or perpetrator mean? They're not conversations for a 5-year-old. You know, the conversations for 5-year-olds are very much about, you know that you're safe with me, but maybe you're not safe with other people. Can you think of an idea, for instance, that you're not safe with someone? What would be an idea when you're in the park and I'm sitting with you and you run off and someone comes up to you? So give role plays, but I don't think the news is exactly the right place to do.
Okay, well, there are plenty of parents like myself who weren't caught up in this. And I must admit that I do have a good feeling and a huge amount of trust in the educators that I hand my children over to every day. As a parent, should I be more questioning of a feeling like that?
Look, I think all of us are immediately going to be questioning that, aren't we? You know, but again, it goes back to, do we not trust anyone? What about when they go to school? When they go and play at someone's house? At some point, we have to give in to our, I guess, in some ways, give in to our insecurities or our anxiety and say, overall, this place seems good. But also there is a red flag, isn't there? There's obviously a red flag in a number of areas about what have we not looked at with this child? For instance, did the child have some bruising? I think there was a story recently, yesterday or this morning, I can't remember when I read it, where a father had a child and he noticed bruising and he was dismissed. Is the child, for instance, all of a sudden regressing in behaviour? Even a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, are they going back to thumb sucking or bed wetting or nail biting or really having a lot of separation anxiety? For under 2, it might be screaming when they arrive at the childcare centre, for instance. So there's some of the things that we would need to look for. And I think that, you know, again, as I said earlier on, perhaps what needs to be also revisited is childcare training. Are they trained in this area? And I think a big thing that's going to come out of this investigation is whistleblowers. Is there someone in all these childcare centres that had a bit of a hint of what may have happened, but felt they weren't really sure, didn't have the legal skills, didn't feel they had the right pathway, didn't have enough evidence, but something was going on? So I think the whistleblower policy and what's going on there also needs to be really heavily scrutinised.
So, I mean, I said I had a good feeling when I dropped my children off at their daycare, but what if you don't have a good gut feeling, but you can't quite put your finger on it? How, as a parent, do you follow up on that?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of parents are very intuitive, aren't they? You know, when my eldest daughter was 2, and everyone used to say, put her into childcare for a day, you know, it's great social skills, blah, blah, blah. Well, by day 2, she came into the car and she said, "I sad, mummy." I went, okay, we're done. No more childcare. We're done. I'll find alternative ways, you know. So, look, I don't know what to say. Some parents don't have that option. We know that. We all know that. And I guess don't be afraid to trust your child. And you know, that's a big call when I've got work obligations, I've got mortgage obligations, I'm a single parent. I can't trust my child in the way I need to, you know, because I've got all these obligations around me and commitments to try and get a life, you know, support us. I guess have a talk. Another option would be to have a talk with someone in the childcare centre if that's how you're feeling.
Okay.
Book in a time. Don't do it just a drop off. Make an appointment. Sit down with someone and say, this is what I'm feeling. I don't know where this feeling is coming from. Is there any way that you could perhaps give me some surety, some confidence? That is a very fine, sympathetic, empathic and intelligent way to approach it.
Now, Sandy, there is another aspect to this. There is a group out saying men should be banned from working in childcare centres. And I've got to say, I do feel for men who work in this industry, because although this is a really uncomfortable thing to say out loud, I feel like I would feel a bit uneasy if I was handing my child over to a male educator at this point. And I know that is unfair. This is one man who has tainted all the men who work in this industry because there are so few of them. Is that a valid feeling for parents to have if there are male educators at their centres?
It's an entirely valid feeling. And remember, it's a feeling. Absolutely. I think all of us would perhaps feel that way. But is it logical or rational? And the answer is no. So first of all, what I've read that is there's 8% of men in the childcare industry. And if you take away administrators and managers, there's only about 4% of men working in childcare. The logical counter argument is that, do we now take away male paediatric nurses? Do we take away male paediatricians? No, we don't. So the argument, and there's many counter arguments I could offer to that. And it doesn't make sense. I understand the feeling entirely, but it's not rational and it's not logical. Equally, having great male role models in children is very valuable, especially for a lot of families that don't have access to a male. You know, many single mothers, particularly, don't have men in their lives to look after their children role model. So good, strong childcare male role models are wonderful and should be really supported to have them actively involved in childcare. So again, if people are feeling fretful about that, just logically think, does that mean we should be banning male paediatricians?
Okay, that is a really good way to think of it, and I hadn't looked at it from that perspective before. We're nearly about to wrap this up, Sandy, but if there are parents who are listening to this who are worried about their children, what are some of the signs that they should look out for in their kids?
Look, I think if it's under 2, look for regressive behaviours. That's the very first thing that I would say, that all of a sudden they're clinging to you when they're going into childcare, they're crying. Don't just go, children cry, children think. Be mindful. And that's, you know, a lot of parents are very intuitive, very careful, very supportive. If your child is under 5, listen to them. Just because they're 5 or 4, don't dismiss the fact that they have a voice. They do have a voice, and a lot of children are absolutely truthful. You know, in some of the reportage of child abuse, children rarely are caught out as liars. So have that front and in your mind, that if a child is saying that someone touched me, or I have got bruises or unexplained bruises in the genital area, on your thighs, on the buttocks, take note of it and don't dismiss it. Don't listen to if someone says, oh, they fell over. Really? Where did they fall over? How did they fall over? They've never had bruises on their bottom before. So be very, in tune to your child and say, I validate you. Just like we say at the very outset, Jane, I validate parents and normalise their emotions, their response. We also need to be very careful that we do that to our children as well. Nothing they say is rubbish.
And finally, Sandy, where can people go to for more help?
Look, I think there's 2 things. At home, and I've written this out, is the Australian Institute of Family Studies have a really great webinar supporting non-offending parents after child sexual abuse. So if you want to sit at home and Google something, I think that's it's a great webinar to have a look at. And then secondly, if you can go and see a psychologist, obviously that would be my second recommendation. So you may go to a GP first of all and get a mental health care plan, then you get 6 sessions with a psychologist for a nominal fee, and try and get someone who is, experienced in child sexual abuse, and get the support, get the validation, get everything that you need. There's empathy and directions and skills that you probably need moving forward.
Sandy, it is a really tough thing to think about and talk about, but thank you for giving us some alternative ways to think about this and to move forward through it. Thank you for being our guest on today's Take.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much.
A big thank you to psychologist Sandy Ray, and if you have any information about this story, please do contact Crime Stoppers. A dedicated advice line has also been established. You can call 1800 791 241. Thank you for joining us for today's Take. If you have any ideas on what we should cover next, please do let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, please subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps. I'm Jane Azzopardi. I will see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. I hope you have a great day.